Wyoming Territory, October 1873. The snow had come early that year, dry and sharp as glass, and by the time Lawson Hart spotted her on the ridge, she looked half dead. Just a coat hanging off bones and a pair of eyes too big for her face. He pulled his horse to a slow stop. "Ma'am." She did not answer, just stood there in the wind, holding tight to a little girl with a limp curl stuck to her cheek. The girl was maybe 5, and in the woman's other arm, sagging like a sack of flour, was a boy, smaller than the girl, bundled in rags that had stopped being warm a long time ago. Lawson dismounted. "You all right?" The woman's knees gave out and she dropped to the ground with both children still clutched to her. She did not make a sound. Lawson dropped beside her, catching the boy before he hit the ground. Hey, I got you." He took the child and steadied her against his shoulder. "They breathing?" The woman nodded barely. Her lips were cracked. "They have not eaten in days. It was the last storm. We got turned around." Lawson looked closer. Her boots were falling apart. The hem of her dress had frozen stiff. "Where's their pa?" She blinked hard. "Gone. Left when the food ran low." Lawson swore under his breath. He stood and whistled for his horse. "I got a cabin 3 miles east. You and these two ain't gonna last another hour out here." She did not protest. Just let him lift the boy up into the saddle first, then the girl. He reached for her hand. "Come on." She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were ice. She weighed almost nothing. They rode slow. He kept his arms tight around all 3 of them. The cold bit through his coat, but he kept them covered best he could. By the time they reached his cabin, just a square timber house tucked against a ridge of pines, the sun was a pale copper coin dropping behind the hills. Inside, heat hit them like a wall. The fire had barely gone out since September. Lawson set the kids on the cot near the hearth and turned to her. "Sit. I'll get broth on." She tried to protest. "You do not have to, I do." He found the last jar of beef stock, poured it over potatoes and dried carrots, then added a pinch of salt. While it simmered, he brought her a blanket. She flinched when he laid it over her shoulders. "You got a name?" he asked. She looked at the fire a moment. Florence Talley. That's Penny and this one's Preston." Lawson looked to the kids. Penny was asleep already, curled against her brother. Preston had not woken once. "You got family anywhere?" Florence shook her head. "We were headed for Laramie. My brother had land there, but we never made it past the Black Hills." Lawson poured a tin cup of broth and handed it to her. "Drink slow." She obeyed without speaking. Her hands shook. Lawson sat across from her and waited until her cup was empty. "You eat first," he said. "Then them." "No. The children, you eat first, Florence," he said again, softer this time. "You will not be any good to them dead." Her eyes met his. For a second there was something in them, fear, grief, pride, but it passed. She took the second cup. That night, he gave the cot to the children and rolled out his bedroll near the door. Florence did not argue. She sat by the fire until it was nothing but coals, then lay beside the children and pulled them close. Lawson watched her in the dark. The curve of her back, the way one hand stayed on Preston's hair. He had seen starving men before. Dying men. But something about Florence Talley clung to his ribs. She had not asked for anything. Not food. Not help. Not even comfort. He had never seen someone so empty and still so full of fight. In the morning, Penny woke first. Her cheeks were rounder already and her voice was clearer. "Mama? Where are we?" Florence sat up slow. "We are safe." Lawson handed her a tin of warm milk. "Figured they could use this more than coffee." Florence nodded. "Thank you. Do not have much, but what I do have is yours. At least till you figure out your next step." Florence looked at him. "Why?" "Because I found you on the edge of dying and you had 2 little ones who could not walk no more. That is reason enough." She looked away, but not before he saw her eyes go wet. He cleared his throat. "I will head out later. Need to shoot a rabbit or 2, restock wood. You stay inside. Keep warm." When he came back that afternoon, he found Penny laughing at something Florence had said and Preston clinging to her skirts like a pup. Florence looked up, startled, and went quiet. Lawson dropped the rabbits on the table. Figured they could use meat on their bones. Florence nodded. You are feeding us before yourself. Lawson shrugged. I will eat when it makes sense. That night, after the children were asleep, Florence stayed by the fire again. She held her hands out to the heat, her face quiet. You do not have to stay, she said suddenly. I know. You have already done more than anyone else ever has. Lawson looked at her. You do not owe me anything, Florence. She did not answer, just stared at the flame. He stood. I will take first watch. There was bear scat near the woodpile. Florence looked up. You do not sleep much, do you? Not when I got something worth guarding. Her breath caught. Just for a second. The next morning she set a plate in front of him before he could reach for the pan. Rabbit stew. Warm and thick. He frowned. You cooked. I can hold a spoon again, she said. That counts for something. He smiled. More than something. Over the next few days, color came back to her cheeks. Penny's laugh returned. Preston started walking again, chasing a stick outside. Florence swept the porch, mended a button, looked him in the eye when she spoke. And every night, she sat a little closer to the fire. A little closer to him. One evening, as the snow came down light and quiet, he set a hand on her arm. Just a touch. She did not pull away. He looked at her. You got fight in you, Florence Talley. She looked back. I am not sure there was much left. Until you. He swallowed hard. She leaned in just an inch. You fed them first. But you fed me too. My heart. He reached for her hand. You were starving. I could see it. And you gave me more than food. They sat there, quiet, the fire snapping low. Her fingers stayed in his. And for the first time since he had found her, Lawson let himself hope. Lawson found her at the table just after sunrise. Sleeves rolled back, elbows dusted with flour. Her hair, still damp from washing, clung in loose strands behind her ears. She was kneading dough slow, careful, like she hadn't had cause to touch something gentle in years. I didn't mean to wake you, she said without looking up. You didn't, Lawson replied, leaning against the doorframe. Been up. Just needed a reason to come in. Florence pressed her thumbs into the dough, folding it over, her wrists moving steady. I thought biscuits might help stretch what's left of the dried meat. He stepped closer. That's a good thought. Penny was still asleep under the quilt, but Preston had crawled to the hearth and was playing with a pine cone, humming tunelessly to himself. Lawson watched him a moment, then turned back to Florence. You've been quiet since yesterday. She pinched off a piece of dough and shaped it into a round. I keep thinking I'll wake and it'll all be gone. The fire, the roof, the safety. You. I ain't going. She placed the biscuit on the tin sheet, eyes still down. I've heard that before. Lawson didn't answer right away. Instead, he stirred the coals and added a split log. The room filled with that drywood scent, clean and warm. You hear anything from outside last night? He asked. Florence shook her head. Just the wind. Maybe a coyote. Something bigger crossed near the back fence. Tracks were deep. Might be elk passing through, maybe a stray cow from the Duncan place. She looked over. You want me to check the fence line later? Lawson raised an eyebrow. You offering to mend posts? I've done worse. He nodded, a quiet grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're not like most women I've met. Florence turned back to the dough. Most women haven't had to walk their children through 2 states. Lawson crouched beside Preston, letting the boy drop the pine cone into his palm. He's stronger than he looks. She nodded. He stopped speaking after we left Dakota. But the humming started again yesterday. That means something. You ever think of staying put? Florence's hands stilled on the dough. There's always been a next place to get to. Even before. Even before what? She didn't answer. Just started shaping another biscuit. Lawson let the question hang. He knew better than to pry open a wound. Let it come when it's ready. After breakfast, she bundled the children and followed him out while he checked the trap line. The snow was shallow enough to walk, though the crust broke under her boots. She didn't complain. Just kept pace. They found 1 rabbit caught clean. Lawson handed it to her by the ears. That one's yours. She held it without flinching. You want me to skin it? Only if you want practice. She looked at him, then nodded. All right. He watched her work, slow and precise, hand steady. No hesitation. You ever live on land like this before? He asked, watching the dark stains spread across the snow. My father worked cattle near Abilene when I was a girl. My brothers helped with branding. I collected eggs. Learned to stitch a saddle wound shut before I was 10. Lawson looked impressed. That's not something most teach daughters. He didn't have sons left by then. He fell quiet. Florence wrapped the meat in cloth and tied it. What about you? Always been out here. Born in Nebraska. Came west after the war. Figured I'd find something better. Did you? He met her eyes. Not until now. She looked away, cheeks coloring. You don't know me. I know you carried 2 children across the plains without breaking. I know your hands are blistered, but you still made biscuits at dawn. That's enough for a start. Back at the cabin, Penny helped fold the pelts Lawson had been drying near the stovepipe. Florence watched her, something soft flickering in her expression. She's still just a little girl, she said quietly. She's got her mother's spine. That evening, the wind picked up, tapping branches against the roof like knuckles on wood. Florence stood at the window, arms crossed, eyes tracing the dark outside. You think the storm's turning back? She asked. Maybe, or it's just passing through. She glanced at him. That's the trouble, isn't it? Knowing whether something's coming back or just passing through. Lawson stepped beside her. I'm not the passing kind. She didn't speak, just looked out a moment longer. Then she reached for the curtain and let it fall. Later, when the children were asleep, she sat across from him near the fire, legs tucked beneath her. Her voice was low. I was married once. She didn't look at him. He was clever, handsome, knew how to charm. But he wasn't built for lean months. Lawson stared at the flames. That why he left? He said he'd find food. Said he'd be back by sundown. That was 17 days ago. Lawson didn't answer. She turned toward him. I buried the ring under a pine tree near the Belle Fourche. I didn't want it anymore. He looked at her then. You want something else? I want something that doesn't leave when the snow comes. Lawson reached for her hand, just once, and held it between both of his. Her fingers were dry, but warm now. She didn't pull away. Outside, the wind quieted, and inside that small cabin, the silence between them was not empty. It was waiting. The river thawed early that spring. You could hear it from the porch, ice breaking loose in long, slow groans, then rushing off down the valley like it had somewhere to be. Lawson stood outside with an axe over his shoulder, watching the water swell past the cottonwoods. When Florence came up behind him with a shawl wrapped tight and her hair pinned back for work, he didn't turn. Just said if it crests again, it might take part of the southern fence. We could dig a channel, she said. Reroute it off the slope. Lawson nodded once. Need to start before the ground's too soft. I'll help. He looked at her then. The color in her face had deepened since the cold months. Her frame still ran narrow, but she stood grounded now, like the wind couldn't knock her over anymore. I'll need someone to keep Preston out of the mud, he said. I'll tie a belt to his collar if I have to. He chuckled, low and rough. That'd do it. They walked the fence line together later, Florence dragging a stick through the thawed dirt to mark where the trench should go. Penny followed behind with a basket to gather the early shoots of yarrow and wild onion that had started to sprout near the edge of the woods. You always know what's good to keep, Lawson said. Florence didn't stop moving. My mother taught me. She said even the smallest patch of ground can give if you look close enough. He watched her fingers move over the young leaves. You talk about her like she's still around. She isn't, Florence said, quiet, but her voice still comes when I need it. Preston was busy chasing something under the brush, his boots sinking into muck with every step. Penny called after him, and when he didn't stop, she yanked him back by the sleeve. He let out a sharp yelp. Florence raised her voice. Penny gently. He was gonna fall in the creek. I know, but yelling won't help him listen. Lawson leaned on the shovel handle. She's just trying to keep him safe. Florence looked over. She's too young to be mothering. She's learning from the best there is. The wind shifted, pushing the scent of wet pine across the slope. Florence wiped her brow with the back of her hand and squinted toward the line of hills beyond the ridge. What is it? Lawson asked. Nothing, she said. Just thinking how far we've come. He stepped closer. You still looking for a next place? No, she said, firm. I think this is the place I was trying to get to. I just didn't know it yet. Lawson didn't say anything, but the corners of his eyes creased deeper than usual. That evening, she brought in the last of the dried yarrow and set it out near the stove to cure. Penny sat stitching along a scrap of muslin, and Preston had fallen asleep with his head on her lap. Florence brushed a hand through his hair, her fingers moving slow. Lawson came in with a bundle of firewood and set it down near the hearth. You're quiet tonight, he said. Florence nodded. I've been thinking. About what comes after surviving. Lawson sat across from her, elbows on his knees. There's more to living than just making it through. I know that now, she said. But I don't know what to do with it. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilskin. I found this near the trap line. Figured it might be worth keeping. She took it carefully, unwrapping the cloth to find a bone-handled comb, yellowed and smooth at the edges, but still whole. I haven't owned one since we crossed the Missouri, she said. I thought maybe you'd want something just yours. Florence turned it over in her hands. No one's ever given me something like this. Lawson tilted his head. It's just a comb. It's not. She set it down gently on her lap. You see what I need before I ask. You don't press. You wait. You watch. I don't think you'd let me do it any other way. Florence smiled, small but steady. That's true. The fire crackled between them. Preston stirred and curled tighter against her side. I want to stay, she said, watching the flames. Not for the season. Not until the river rises again. I want to plant roots. I was hoping you'd say that. She looked up. You were. Since the moment you made room for hope again. Florence leaned forward then, slow and certain, and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. Just a quiet promise sealed in warmth and ashwood light. When she pulled back, her eyes didn't waver. Lawson, she said, her voice full and sure, I want to build something here. With you. For them. For us. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers between hers. Then we'll build it. Together. And outside, beyond the walls of the cabin, the last of the snow melted into the dirt, carrying winter off and leaving spring behind, soft and real as the life they were beginning. The first calf was born just after dusk, slick and trembling in the straw behind the shed. Lawson had been watching the heifer all afternoon, noting the way she paced, restless and heavy, her breath fogging in the cool air. When it started, Florence came without needing to be asked, tying back her sleeves and kneeling beside him in the hay. She's not pushing steady, she said, resting a hand on the cow's flank. She's tired. Too early in the season. Florence glanced up. If you hold her steady, I can guide the shoulders. Lawson nodded and moved to the heifer's head, murmuring low while Florence worked. The calf came slow, one leg tucked under awkward, but it came. When the last of the afterbirth lay steaming in the hay, Florence wiped her hands on her apron and leaned back on her heels. Looks like a bull, she said. Lawson looked at her, hay clinging to her skirt, sweat glinting on her temple. We'll keep him. Raise him straight. They watched as the calf wobbled upright, legs splayed, muzzle twitching toward its mother. Later, after the stable was quiet, Florence sat on the porch steps with her feet bare, ankles streaked with mud. She didn't speak, just watched the pale clouds drift behind the dark rise of the hills. Lawson came out with 2 tin cups of water. You've done that before. Not since my father's herd, she said, accepting the cup. He let me stay up for the night births if I promised not to fall asleep in church. Lawson sat beside her. You keep that promise? Most Sundays. Pause settled between them, soft and easy. You ever think of keeping stock again? He asked. I wouldn't mind it. Milk to trade, hides to tan. Something steady. Lawson sipped his water. I could take another section of fence east. Clear a strip for pasture. Florence looked over. You already do more than your share. I don't see it that way. She traced a knuckle along the rim of her cup. I know. From inside, Penny's voice rose in a sing-song, coaxing Preston to settle. They'd built them a small cot near the window, and Florence had stitched curtains from old flour sacks to give them shade. The room had begun to feel lived in, not just passed through. Preston asked me today if this was our forever house, she said. Lawson turned to her. What did you tell him? That I wasn't sure yet. He nodded, letting the wind move through the silence. But I think I am, she added a moment later. Sure, Lawson set his cup down. Florence. She looked at him. I've never asked this before. Not once. Not to anyone. Her breath caught, but she didn't turn away. I want to build a life with you. One that doesn't stop when the river floods or the roof leaks. One that holds even when it's quiet. She didn't answer right away. Just reached for his hand, folding her fingers through his with a steadiness that didn't need words. Her palm was rough from work, but warm, and her grip was sure. Then let's build it, she said. They didn't speak again that night. Just sat close, watching the last of the light fade behind the cottonwoods, while the barn settled into stillness, and the air filled with the scent of fresh hay and clean water. By morning, the calf had found its legs. So had they. The rain had come and gone by early May, leaving the soil dark and pliant beneath the morning sun. Florence stood at the edge of the garden plot with her skirts pinned above her boots and her sleeves rolled past her elbows. Beside her, Penny dropped seeds into shallow furrows, careful and precise, while Preston mimicked her in the crooked row next to hers, more dirt on his cheeks than in the ground. Lawson knelt a few paces away, pressing stakes into the corners of the fence he was building to keep out the mule deer that wandered down from the hills. He glanced up as Florence leaned to adjust Preston's line. Your rows are straighter than mine, he said. I've had practice, she replied, brushing a smear of dirt from the boy's brow. My father was strict about seed spacing. Said a row should be clean enough to walk barefoot through with your eyes shut. Lawson chuckled. That sounds like a man who didn't trust weeds. She smiled, but it didn't linger long. He never saw me raise anything past a kitchen herb. He was gone before I married. Lawson stood and wiped his palms on his trousers. You never told me what he was like. He kept a silver watch in his pocket, she said. Even when there was nothing left to buy time with. He believed in order, in keeping your word, no matter who was listening. Lawson nodded. Sounds like someone I would have respected. Florence straightened, resting a hand on her lower back. He would have liked you. He didn't have much patience for loud men. They finished the planting by the time the sun was overhead. Penny carried water from the pump and Florence followed behind, dampening the rows with a steady hand. Lawson packed away the tools and leaned against the shed, watching the light catch in her hair as it slipped loose from its pins. She walked over to him when the work was done, brushing her hands clean on her apron. I want to make something for the house, she said. Like what? A quilt? One we've all touched? I've saved scraps from Preston's old shirts and Penny's winter dress. I thought I'd stitch your work gloves in, the ones too worn to mend. He looked thoughtful. I've got a few with the fingers torn. They're yours. I want it to feel like home, she said. Not just a roof. A place that remembers us. Lawson reached for her wrist gently. You've already made it that. That evening, they sat on the porch with the children between them. Penny humming some tune she'd picked up from Florence while she helped with the mending. Preston leaned against Lawson's knee, half asleep, thumb curled against his lip. Florence watched the light fade across the slope. Did you ever think you'd want this? He looked down at the boy's small shoulder resting against him. I didn't think I'd deserve it. You do, she said. Lawson looked at her, and the softness in her eyes made something tighten low in his chest. I've been thinking, he said after a moment, about what we're building. Not just the house or the land. Florence turned toward him. Tell me. There's a circuit preacher who comes through from Rawlins every few months. He'll be back 1st of June. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak. I'd like to stand beside you, he said, voice low. Proper. Not just in the eyes of the world, but yours. Florence looked at him a long time, then reached for his hand. Yes. He blinked. You mean that? I've meant it since the first time you gave me warmth without asking anything in return. I just didn't know how to say it until now. Lawson leaned forward and kissed her, slow and certain, with her hands still curled in his. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. Penny made a gagging sound behind them and Florence laughed against his mouth. Go on inside, she said, standing and pulling Preston gently to his feet. There's Stu waiting. As they went in, Florence lingered at the door, looking back at Lawson. You're not afraid of quiet, are you? He shook his head. Not with you in it. They married beneath the cottonwood tree just east of the garden where the soil stayed soft and cool through the hottest days. Penny wore a crown of meadow flowers and carried Preston on her hip, both of them dressed in clothes Florence had sewn by hand from what she'd set aside. The preacher arrived on a borrowed mule, dust on his collar, and recited the vows with a voice that cracked toward the end. Florence's dress was simple, dyed with walnut husks and stitched with rows of tiny, even thread. Her fingers didn't tremble when she took Lawson's hands. She looked straight at him, her voice steady. I walked through half the country not knowing what I was looking for, she said. But I know now. It was this. Not just safety. Not just peace. You. Lawson's throat tightened. I've built fences, dug post holes, survived winters that turned men bitter. But I've never built anything worth keeping until you. They kissed before the preacher gave the word and no one corrected them. That night, the four of them sat near the fire, the quilt already half-pieced across Florence's lap. Lawson leaned back against the hearth, Preston asleep across his chest, Penny curled beside him. Florence watched them, her needle paused mid-stitch. She looked up at him. You think they'll remember this? Lawson nodded. They'll remember they were safe, loved. You gave them that. We gave it to each other, she said. The room glowed with firelight and quiet breath, and the wind outside passed soft through the grass. Florence set the quilt aside and crossed the floor to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. Lawson touched her cheek, and she turned her face into his palm. We're home, she whispered. And they were. Always would be.